I had been living in that house since I was 2 years old, so the noises that I heard coming from the attic weren't strange to me. When I was little, my mom would tell me that fairies were living there to watch over us, and if I was really bad, they would come and take me, and I would have to live with them forever. I know that she was trying to frighten me, but I don't think she actually realized how much it did scare me. I used to have a reoccurring nightmare of some unseen force taking me out of bed and putting me in a burlap sack. I could feel every bump as they dragged me up those attic stairs. It felt so real. And then I would wake up in my bed and it would be morning. I was too terrified to get out of bed at night, but every now and then I would hear footsteps and think that they were coming for me and sprint as fast as I could to my parents' room. One of my earliest memories was me diving into their bed after hearing something moving around up there in the middle of the night. It would make my dad check every inch of that house, especially the attic door before I would go back to bed. I was always afraid that he would forget to put the chains back on after feeding them. I used to hide under the covers with my mother's arms wrapped around me. She used to sing to me and I would usually be asleep by the time that he returned. She had such a soothing voice. I always believed nothing could harm me as long as I was in her arms. She was so calm no matter what happened. I can't remember one time she raised her voice to me, not even when I tried to wash her new car with paint thinners that I had found in the shed. My dad wasn't as calm as my mom, but he never shouted at me. He believed communication was the key to any good relationship. So whenever I got in trouble, he would sit me down and explain everything to me in a way that I could understand. I always respected him for that, and I suppose that it worked. I was polite and respectful. They never had any of the neighbors call to complain about me. I might have had 1 or 2 mishaps at school over the years, but I never got taken to the principal's office or anything like that. Plus, I had good grades, so I think they must have been happy with me. The town that I live in is small with less than 1,000 people, but we're a very tight-knit community. Everybody knows everyone and we all look out for each other. It's one of the safest places in the country to raise a kid. My dad would always tell me that. The sheriff lives 3 houses up. My dad's best friend since childhood, Tony, lives across the street from us. My teacher lives on the next block. It doesn't make sense how my parents had managed to hide a child in the attic all these years without someone finding out. Our next door neighbor, Mrs. Henson, went on a date with a guy that she met on Facebook a few years back, while her husband was at a bar. The whole town knew about it before she got out of the restaurant, even though it happened 2 towns over. And that's the thing about small towns. Everybody knows your business. So how did my parents get away with it for so long? Looking back, I probably should have noticed something was up. The constant scratching, the crying, the chained door. And then there was the feeding bucket. I guess when you're a kid, you just believe anything your parents tell you. If you can't trust them, who can you trust? By the time that I stopped believing in fairies, my parents had me convinced that raccoons were living up there, and my dad was treating them for rabies. I don't know how I believed them. It sounds so stupid now, but it worked. I never went near the attic. I did ask them once why they just didn't call an exterminator, and my mom told me that if they did, they would have to get put to sleep. She said that every creature should get a second chance, no matter how sick they are. I don't know if my dad felt the same. I would hear him pacing up and down the hallway upstairs every night before feeding time. My mom and I used to wait in the kitchen. The steps to the attic were directly over us, so I would often hear weird noises when he opened the door. My mom would try to hide it by putting on music. The weird thing about it is, they were some of my happiest memories. We would always be singing and dancing until my dad came back and called my mom into the other room. His eyes were always red and bloodshot. He told me that it was because of the attic insulation, but sometimes I would put my ear up to the door to listen in, and I was sure that I could hear him sobbing. I first started to get suspicious about a year ago, and it was my dad's birthday, and he had had a bit too much to drink and forgotten to lock the attic door. I only noticed when I got up to go to the toilet. I tried to warn him, but he was out cold on the couch. I didn't want to wake my mom, so I went back to bed. A while later, I was awoken by a weird noise, but I thought that it came from the attic, so I didn't think anything of it and tried to go back to sleep. Before I got a chance to close my eyes, I heard a thud. It sounded like it came from the end of my bed, so I got a fright and jumped up. Staring into the darkness, I could just about make out a shadowy figure, rocking over and back in the corner. The noise was coming from them banging their head on the wall as they swayed back and forth repeatedly. First, I thought that it was my dad. He was very drunk that night. He was a bit of a lightweight, so once we found him asleep in the bathtub wrapped in a towel because he couldn't make it to his room. "Dad, is that you?" I whispered, but he didn't answer. Frustrated, I blurted out, "Dad, for God's sake, will you answer me?" Suddenly, the thuds started to become louder and closer together, and that's when I realized that it wasn't my dad. I could feel the blood rushing to my head and my heart started jumping to the beat. Thud, 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 of his head hitting the wall. I wanted to shout out for help, but I was breathing so heavily that I thought I was going to faint. And then it just stopped, and the only sound that I could hear apart from my racing heart was the intense, shallow breathing coming from whoever was standing at the end of the bed. As I watched him slowly turn toward me, there was a moment where I thought that I was going to die. I couldn't feel my heart anymore, and I'm fairly sure my life flashed before my eyes. I then heard him shout, "Josh," before laughing maniacally. I'll tell you this, I screamed louder than I ever have screamed in my life. I wouldn't be surprised if I woke the whole town. I don't really remember much after that. I may have passed out. I don't know how my parents kept doing this, but they were able to convince me that it was all a dream, and I believed them even when I found a head-shaped dent in my wall the next day. I guess they were my parents, and I never expected them to lie to me, but the veil had been lifted, and I started to notice every little noise that came from the attic, and it scared the heck out of me. The following months were tough, and I hated going to bed, and by then, I was too old to run into the safety of my mother's arms. So I hid under the covers every night in case that thing came back. It took a long time, but eventually I began to recover, and things started to go back to normal, if only for a short time. I don't know why my mom and dad kept this from me for so long. They must have known that I would have found out about it sooner or later. They probably thought that it would scare me, and they wanted to wait until I was a bit older. But they were wrong. Nothing could have scared me as much as it did that night. My dad had had a few too many again, and ended up falling asleep on the couch. To be fair to him, he wasn't always like that. I guess keeping a secret that big took its toll on him. I didn't even notice the attic door was unlocked when I went to bed. I was probably too tired from staying up late the night before on the PlayStation. So by the time that my head hit the pillow, I was out cold. I don't know how long after it was, but something woke me. I heard, Josh, please wake up." I was after coming out of a deep sleep and I could barely keep my eyes open, so I thought that I was dreaming and I pulled the covers over my head. I then felt a hand on my shoulder. "Josh, please, we're running out of time." When I turned around, I saw that shadowy figure standing over me again. I freaked out and screamed uncontrollably. Moments later, my dad rushed into my room and turned on the light, and that's when I saw its face, and it terrified me. My dad put a sack over his head and had him dragged out of there in seconds. The only thing he said to me was, "Did he touch you?" But I was in shock and couldn't answer, so he locked me in my room. It was the next morning before he came back. By then, I'd started to come around and I wanted answers. He didn't walk in right away like he usually would. Instead, he knocked. "Josh," my dad said, "I need you to answer this question truthfully. Can you do that?" "Dad, why am I locked in here? What's happening?" I replied nervously. "Josh," he shouted. That was the first time that I ever heard him talk to me like that. So I got frightened and I started to cry. "Josh, just listen," he said, this time in a calmer tone. "Everything will be okay, son. Just answer the question, please." I blurted out, "No, Daddy didn't touch me. Why? Did I do something wrong?" "No, son, you did good," he replied as he let out a sigh of relief, and then he walked away. And I heard nothing from him for hours. When he came back, Mom was with him. She had a burger and fries which she had left down on the bed beside me. I knew things were bad when she couldn't even look me in the eye. When I asked them what was wrong, they seemed to struggle to get the words out. They were usually very vocal, so it was weird to see them like that. When they eventually started explaining what was going on, it shocked me to my core. They told me that I had a brother that they had kept locked in the attic all these years. I didn't know what to say, but it did explain what I saw that night and why that shadowy figure looked so much like me. They said that he was born with a dangerous condition, and that they had to lock him in the attic to keep everybody safe. But they assured me that it was okay as long as I didn't have any contact with him. When I asked them why, they didn't just take him to the hospital to get help. They told me that it wasn't that kind of sickness. I must have had a million questions to ask them, but I think it was too much to process at the time. So I just got angry with them and told them that I never wanted to talk to them again. I don't know if I could ever trust them after what they did. What else were they lying about? And what about my poor brother? They're monsters. How could they keep anybody locked away like that, especially their own son? Would they do the same to me someday? What's worse, I know my brother is locked up there alone and scared. I really want to help him, but I'm worried they might be telling the truth and he is sick. Then I would only make things worse. With what's been happening the last few days, I started to believe that I was losing it. I didn't know what was real anymore. Before I found out that I had a brother, I had the perfect life. A loving family, good friends, and zero stress. Now all I have is paranoia and loneliness. I wish that I could go back to that night and wake my dad or mom and make sure that the door was locked. That way, he would have never escaped and I would be living in my dream world, oblivious to the truth, but at least I'd be happy. Since I found out about him, that's all I've been able to think about. My birthday was coming up and my parents usually threw me a party. The thoughts of that really hit me. The cake, the presents, surrounded by all my family and friends. It seems so cruel now. Last year was one of the best that I had. I got everything that I wanted while he was up there in a cold, dark attic. The only company that he got was a brief visit from my dad, and that was only to feed him. I don't think I'll be able to celebrate anything like that ever again without thinking of him. I'll never forgive my parents for that. I don't care what's wrong with him. No one deserves a life like that, and I was going to do whatever I could to free him. I tried talking to my parents a few times after that night. I was hoping that they would give me some sort of logical explanation for what they did to him, but they denied everything and tried to make me believe that it was only a dream. They nearly had me fooled too, until one night I overheard them talking in their room. My mom had said something about his condition that it can't be controlled, and that he could hurt a lot of people again if he got out. And then they started arguing about what to do with him. My mom wanted to keep him close, but my dad wanted to send him back to where, well, I don't know. Mom came storming out of the room before I could find out and caught me listening in. I tried to confront her and told her what I had heard, but she believes that I am that same little dumb kid that thought fairies lived in the attic and told me some BS story, but I knew better. That was the last time I asked them any questions like that again. They would only lie to me anyways. If I were going to find out the truth, I would have to be smart. The only problem was they had become very suspicious of me, so I had to make them believe that I was on their side. I mean, it was easy. They are sociopaths. They thought they could fool me into believing anything that they said. All I had to do was play dumb and agree with whatever they told me. By day, I was their perfect little angel, always obedient, like the trained monkey they had wanted me to be. But by night, while they were sleeping, I started to communicate with my brother by gently knocking on the ceiling. He may not have understood me, but at least he knew that I was there for him. That was the only time that I felt normal. I was unable to sleep, and when I did, I had horrible nightmares. I started to feel really lonely at night, so after a while I began speaking to him. I didn't care if they could hear me or not. I was just happy to have someone to talk to. I was sure that I was never going to get a reply until one night. He must have found a way to get into the air vents, because I began to hear him whispering. The first night, it only lasted for a few seconds, and it was kind of muffled, but I'm sure that he said, "It's in your food. Check their closet." I wasn't sure exactly what he meant, so the next day when my mom was cooking dinner and dad was at work, I checked to see if he was telling the truth. In the back of my mom's closet, I found a bottle with my name on the label. It was dated for the day after they had told me about my brother, and it was almost half empty. I couldn't believe it. They were actually drugging me, but it did explain all the weird things that I was seeing. I was sure they were putting it in my food, so after that, whenever they gave me something that they had prepared, I threw it out when they weren't looking. But they must have found another way because things only got worse. The horrible nightmares that I had, they started happening while I was awake. The first time that I had experienced it, I was in the bathroom washing my hands after having dinner at my friend's house. Suddenly, I heard giggling and little footsteps outside the door. I was sure that it was just Tony's little sister, so I said, "In just a minute, I'm nearly done." And then everything went dark, and even though it was the middle of the day, I panicked and I ran for the door, but I tripped and fell. When I tried to get up, something grabbed my legs and then my arms, and I could feel myself getting dragged away. The next thing I knew, I was on the bathroom floor screaming like a little girl. Tony's parents were standing over me. It was so embarrassing. I really had freaked them out, so they rang my parents. I tried to convince them that a bug had scared me, but I don't think they believed me. They were acting weird for the rest of the night. When I went home that night, my brother started talking to me again. This time, his voice was clear, and I could understand him perfectly. He told me my parents drug him every day, and that's why he can only talk at night. He said they were part of a cult and they believed he was possessed, so as a baby they wanted to sacrifice him, but my mom couldn't do it, so she faked his death instead. Unfortunately, she believed he still had a demon inside of him, and they locked him up ever since. I really didn't want to trust him, but what choice had I got? If he is right and I do nothing, I could be living up there with him for the rest of my life. I don't know what will happen if I'm wrong, but surely it can't be any worse than this. He asked me to steal the key from Dad, but he always has it in his pocket, so I would have to sneak into the room in the middle of the night to find it. I begged him to let me go to the police instead, but they said that he wouldn't believe me without proof. The problem is, I'm a nervous wreck. When I was a child, I stole a cookie from the cookie jar before dinner. All through dinner, I was on the verge of a panic attack. In the end, I couldn't take the pressure anymore and I confessed everything. So the night when I was meant to steal the key, I chickened out at the last minute. I felt so guilty for being such a coward, and to make it worse, I could hear him whispering things like, "Please, Josh, help me before it's too late." Or, "Do you want to be locked up here with me because you will? I heard them talking about it." He went on like that for most of the night. I was too ashamed to reply and I tried to ignore him, but it was hard because I could hear the desperation in his voice. By morning, I had had enough. I could not face another night like that. So while my parents were out, I spent the entire day searching for that key, or at least some proof that I had a brother to show the police. I didn't find the key, but I did find something in a photo album. My mom loved that kind of thing. She was very organized. She had documented every step of my life since I was about 3 or 4. But weirdly, there was nothing before that. It was like I didn't exist. And oh yeah, there was one more thing. I found a burlap sack shoved in behind the fridge, with a little bottle of clear liquid and a hypodermic needle inside. That was the last straw. I was sure everything my brother told me was the truth and my parents were planning to lock me up. I couldn't wait until that night to break them out. So I got a claw hammer from the shed and I tried to break the locks. The first one was easy, it only took a few hard strikes, but the other 2 were strong and they wouldn't budge. I gave up when I whacked my finger off the corner of the door and went looking for something bigger. Unfortunately, when I got to the bottom of the stairs, my mom walked in and screamed when she saw me, and then my dad started chasing me. Luckily, I got out the back door before he caught me. I hid in the forest behind my house for hours trying to figure out what to do, before I finally made the decision to go to the police, but by then it was nearly nightfall. The whole way there, I went over everything in my head to make sure that I got my story straight, but by the time that I actually got there, I had become so nervous that I was shaking. I walked in and saw the sheriff standing up behind the desk, talking to a woman with his back to me. I was about to speak, but the woman screamed. It was only then that I realized. All my clothes were covered in blood from the cut that I got from banging my hand off the door. But the looks on their faces, I would say, they thought that I was after murdering someone. I tried to speak again, but I stuttered. In that moment, I was sure they were going to pull out their guns and order me to get on the floor or something like that. But instead, the sheriff calmly said, "Son, are you hurt?" It was at that moment that it all hit me, and I broke down crying. I told him everything, and I mean everything. I even told him about the reoccurring dream I had as a kid. He must have thought that I was crazy. I was waiting for him to throw me into a cell, but he didn't. He just said, "Everything's okay, son, come with me." And he took me to the car. I started to freak out when he stopped outside my house, so he told me to wait there until he came back, and to my relief, because I really didn't want to go inside. I have no idea how long he was in there, but it seemed like hours. I was going over all kinds of scenarios in my head, from my parents chopping up the sheriff and hiding his body, to him coming out with a burlap sack and dragging me to the attic himself. I was nervous but slightly relieved when I saw the sheriff walking towards me. When he asked me to come with him, I nearly crapped myself. Terrified, I blurted out, "Please don't make me go in there. They'll lock me in the attic with my brother," while he held my hand and took me inside. "Oh, relax, son, there's nothing to be afraid of." That's all he said to me as he took me upstairs. At the attic door, I panicked and tried to run but ended up running into my dad's arms. At that point, I was sure that it was all one big conspiracy, and I was going to be locked up there forever. So I kicked and screamed the whole way like a toddler. When I got to the top, I realized that there was nothing up there apart from a few old boxes and some Christmas decorations. It didn't make any sense. I was lost for words. I really thought that there would still be some sign of him up there, but there was nothing. When I asked why they always kept the attic door locked, my dad said it was because the floors were only partly finished, and he was afraid that I would fall through the ceiling and get hurt. As my mom walked me to my room, I heard my dad tell the sheriff that I had stopped taking my meds. The truth is, I was beginning to believe him, and thought that it was all in my imagination, until my mom whispered in my ear, "Don't give in, fight like I did," as she put me to bed. Ever since I went to the sheriff, my parents have been acting really weird, which is saying a lot for them, because they are literally crazy at the best of times. They won't let me go anywhere unless one of them is with me. Even at home, they're around me all the time. I can't even go to the bathroom without one of them questioning me. And I'm pretty sure they have a camera in my room because every single time I put one foot outside of it, somebody is standing there. They treat me like a kindergartner now, helping me with these smallest of tasks like tying my shoes or cutting my food into small pieces. And that's not all. They give me praise for every little thing. My dad keeps calling me a champ. I'm not even sure why. He never did that when I was little. It's embarrassing, especially when he does it in public. I was in the store one day buying a soda when the guy behind the counter accidentally had knocked it over and it fell. But I caught it before it hit the floor. My dad shouted, "Well done, champ," and started clapping. And there was a drunk guy standing behind him and he joined in and started cheering. On the way out, I noticed a group of girls from my school were looking at me smirking. I was so embarrassed. And to make it worse, I really like this one girl named Tracy. She probably thinks that I'm an idiot now. I don't know why they're messing with me like that, but I'm guessing it was just another one of their mind games. They're probably trying to forget about my brother and I hope to do the same. I won't let them. I talk about him every chance that I get. But they keep changing the subject and try to bribe me with whatever I want. I'm not ashamed of it. I take full advantage. It's like this. If I'm going to be locked away from the rest of the world, I might as well make the most of it while I can. They bought me a brand new PlayStation with all the trimmings, a VR headset, games, everything that I could ever ask for. I'm sick of playing their little games and acting like one big happy family. They thought they could separate us by hiding him away where I couldn't find him. It didn't work because one night I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice in my ear. Instantly I jumped up and turned on the light, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I was on my way back to bed when I heard, "Josh." I thought that he was back in the attic, so I stood in the bed and whispered, "I'm sorry for calling the cops. I should have listened to you. I promise that I'll break you out of there this time." "It's okay," he replied. "Every day I feel myself getting stronger and stronger, thanks to you, and they know it. That's why they're trying to keep us apart." I nearly cried. I was so happy to be able to talk to him again. I thought that he was dead. He continued, "One way or another, I'll get out of here, and when I do, they will pay. Everyone will pay." We spoke a lot after that, and I realized that we had a lot in common. We both loved to read and liked many of the same books. I imagined he hadn't had much else to do up there, and my parents probably gave him the books when I was done with them. He even kept a journal. In fact, so did our entire family. My mom gave me a habit of writing in mine before bed every night as far back as I can remember. She even made my dad keep one. I write everything in mine, even my darkest thoughts. One of my biggest fears is my parents finding it. I know they would never understand. I think our connection is getting stronger. He started showing me things in my head, like him getting dragged out of bed in the middle of the night and brought to the attic. Maybe that's why I kept having that reoccurring nightmare as a child. He was trying to ask me for help. Man, I feel so bad now, but I thought it was only a dream. What my dad did to him up there is wrong. I hated my parents, especially my dad. I wanted to know everything, but my brother said that I wasn't ready yet. I had so many visions, and some were so horrible that I can't bear thinking how could anyone hurt people like that. Even though every vision was different and I didn't recognize anyone, they all had one thing in common. The eyes that I was seeing through were pure evil. I could feel the hate and anger pumping through its veins. Then again, maybe it was all a dream. I don't know anymore. But whatever they were, they started to take over my life, and I sometimes forgot what was real. And for a moment, it was like I was a different person. Well, person is the wrong word to describe it. My brother said that it was hallucinations brought on by the drugs that they gave me. He said that they will all stop once we get rid of my parents, but I'm not so sure that he's telling the truth. I can hear my brother's voice all the time now, and not just in my room. I think he's in my head. I don't mind, at least. I'm not alone with them anymore. I have someone on my side. I hated being around my parents. All I wanted to do was be alone in my room, but they wouldn't let me, and they forced me to go on their family days out. It was torture. I always had to be on my toes and act like everything was okay, but it wasn't. All I could think about was freeing my brother. He made sure of that, with this constant whispering inside my head. One day, it got too much for me. We had just come home from a day at the water park, and instead of letting me go to my room like I wanted, my dad forced me to have one of his game nights. I couldn't take one more minute of Monopoly with them monsters. So when it was my turn to roll the dice, I must have lost it and I blacked out. I didn't think that I did anything wrong because I was still sitting there in that same spot with the dice in my hand. But when I looked around, everything in our sitting room was broken. The TV, the table, even our family photos. My parents were pushed up against the wall and they looked terrified. It was so weird to see my dad like that. He was shaking and everything. I thought that he was going to kill me, but he didn't budge from that wall. Instead, my mom walked over to me, smiled and grabbed my hand and took me to my room. When I got there, my mom gave me a big hug and whispered in my ear, "Please, just ignore him and try to be positive. It's the only way to stop him and I can't lose you again," before walking away, sobbing to herself. After that, they barely let me out of my room, and when they did, it was only for a short time. I think it was because of my dad. He couldn't look me in the eye anymore. I think he somehow blamed my mom too, and I could hear them arguing all the time. I was sure that it would only be a matter of time before he left, but my brother wasn't happy about that. He didn't want him to leave before he got his revenge. I don't think he felt the same about Mom. He often shared happy memories of her. Unlike him, I hated both of them. If she had cared so much, she could have done something to stop him anytime she wanted to, but she didn't. Soon the visions became more frequent and he showed me the full extent of what my dad did. When my dad took him to the attic, he used to tie him to a chair and wouldn't even take him out of the sack. When my brother felt searing pain in his left arm, everything became blurry and the music started. It was so surreal. It kind of sounded like something I heard as a child on some kids' shows that I can't remember. Whenever he heard Dad's voice repeating, "You are Josh, you are happy. All your bad thoughts are gone," things became hazy, and the next thing he knew, he is in his bed and it's the next morning. I thought that it was a dream at first until one day the bed got caught in a nail as Dad carried him up the steps to the attic. When my brother had realized what was happening, he managed to fight Dad off and escape out the door, somehow breaking Dad's arm in the process. But when he saw Mom standing at the bottom of the stairs crying, he froze for a second. And then Dad grabbed him and held him down while Mom had injected him. My parents told me they had no choice but to keep him up there until he stopped hurting people, which is sick. It was Dad's own fault that he got hurt that night. My brother was only defending himself. Besides, how could a child that young be capable of hurting anyone? I suppose whatever cult they were part of brainwashed them, and they tried to do the same thing to my brother. I fear soon that I'll be next. After he knew what they were up to, the treatment, as they called it, became very traumatic for him, so he started to block it out by thinking of his happy place, which was him cuddled in bed with Mom or dancing around the kitchen with her. Eventually he got lost and has been trapped in darkness ever since, waiting for his chance to escape. I'm so happy he made contact with me that night, or I would have never known that he existed. I still have no idea how he'll get out of there, but he assures me that it won't be long. I can't wait. I always feel like there was something missing in my life, and now I know why. I wish I could make my parents pay right now for taking him away from me, but I haven't gotten the courage to do it on my own. Lately I feel like I'm losing my mind. One minute I could be sitting on my bed playing the PS. The next minute I could be standing in the kitchen talking to my parents. The weird thing is they look so happy, laughing and joking with me like there's nothing wrong. When I check the time, hours have passed. I don't understand how I could be so friendly with them. I can't face looking at them usually. I don't know what I would do without my brother. He's the only one that I can depend on. He always knows exactly what to say to calm me down when I freak out, which is a lot lately since I started sleepwalking. At first I would wake up in the backyard covered in dirt, but now I started waking up in my parents' room, standing over my mom. I'm so scared. I really hope that my brother comes to save me. He promised that he would. I don't know how much longer I can hold on.